These last couple of years, since riding this bike, I've been in this daft position where the best enduro bike I've ever ridden isn't the one I'd recommend. But I think this changes it. I genuinely do. I love this bike, the Trek Slash, but there's something about it that really grinds my gears. I mean, literally. I want to get rid of that ugly idler, and I have a plan. But will it work? This is Shimano's new XT 9-45 cassette, which has a corresponding derailleur. I think the long travel idler equipped pedal bike has had its moment in the sun and its days are numbered. But can this cassette save it? The Trek Slash is a very good bike. In fact, I think it's probably the best ascending enduro bike that I've ever ridden. It's also the fastest bike we've ever had at QuarterHP. But there is a big but. Would I want to own one? Simply, no. On one run, it is glorious. But to run that high pivot, you'll always need to run an idler. To run a high pivot on an enduro bike, you'll often need to run a second idler. Why? When you have a downhill bike, it has a lot of travel, but crucially, a small range cassette. When you have a short travel high pivot bike, a la Forbidden Druid, you will have a wide range cassette, but you don't have that much travel. So why don't I like bikes with a second idler? Well, firstly, they are ugly. And if I'm riding a hyperbike, I want it to make my trousers fizz. The disruption of clean lines make it look like Orion's put his belt on wrong. Secondly, and more importantly, it comes down to riding your nicest bike on the nicest of summer days. When you use these systems, they work best with a wet chain lubricant, but wet lubes let dry dirt cling to the chain. So you have two compelling options. Either keep reintroducing dry lube and carry around a tiny little bottle with you on all your rides, and in it you use every last drop of chain lube that your friend has in their house, a la Brian Cale. Don't worry about it, bud, I'll get my own chain lube. Or you can use wet lube, let it grind and complain, a la, well, me. But what if we could fix this by bastardizing some of Shimano's latest drivetrain products? When Shimano released their latest generation of XT Di2, there was a lot to talk about, but something that flew slightly under the radar was the short cage mech in its cassette. It still has all the technology of the standard drivetrain, the Hyperglide Plus shift ramps, and the same light, fast feel of Shimano wireless, but in a package that is allowed to be lighter and tighter with smaller steps between gears. We've had the new Di2 on several test bikes, and it is very good. What it loses out to SRAM T-Type in terms of all-out brutalism, it makes up for with the speed of the shift. If you run the group set like Shimano intended, you'll have a rear derailleur that is shorter, meaning it has greater ground clearance. The size of the cage is directly proportionate to the amount of range on the cassette. The bigger the differential between the smallest and largest cogs, the longer the cage will need to be. But what if we took that small range cassette and still used the mech with a longer cage? Could this manage enough of that chain to then reduce the need for that ugly second idler? In its stock 2 idler setup, this bike is very quiet with a very secure chain. It never comes off. But that's not to say I don't think it can be improved, having all the benefits of the current system, but without so many compromises in other areas. What we're going to do next is simply remove that lower idler, but I think the chief problem is going to be the chain flapping around. Now, this doesn't seem like much, but controlling that flailing motion, which acts a bit like a whip cracking, will really reduce the amount of tug on your feet. This bike is very muted at the crankset when you descend it, but I think we should take the idler off, see how bad it is, and then see how good we can make it without that idler by tuning the chain length. The first setup, using both idlers. This setting is very quiet and secure. First, I did a run with the stock setup with both idlers fitted. Now, despite the chain flailing around like a self-flagellating monk, the bike was distinctly muted. So it's certainly got a lot of slack in the system now, and there's less chain wrapped around that chainring, which could increase wear and lessen security. However, if you are concerned about wear, you could always get a steel one. This one is actually a carbon centre with steel teeth for extra longevity. There was a lot of praise earlier on for Shimano's new group sets, which I do think are very good, but whilst we've got them in hand, the lack of clutch is near unforgivable. But let's go see how this thing rides in what will be presumably its worst, noisiest and ratchetiest setup. Like, why wouldn't we want a clutch? You can drive a car without a clutch. You can. It's just more difficult, noisier and impractical. Because if you've heard the noises that come out of Tom's Doka, it sounds like it doesn't have a clutch, but he assures me it does.
Put a new one in myself.
That explains it. Time for setup number 2, removing that idler, but not shortening the chain. I expect this to be quite loud. You know, dude, I'm kind of a sucker for the whole new year, new me thing. And I did straight into a CrossFit gym and it had comparable amounts of chain flying about the place. It's definitely noisier. So this is as worse as it will be. Let's try and optimize this setup without that bottom idler, but with as little chain as possible before going to that tighter cassette where we can just get rid of loads of chain. Let's remove some of that chain. This should hopefully quieten down the bike a bit, as well as keeping my feet nice and calm. So much chain coming out of this thing. And what's that? No clutch. Don't mind me, Shimano. Lettuce, tell me honestly, no white lies. Do you think it's made it look better?
I think it's the parallel lines.
It looks cleaner. And in some ways, this is the really important test, because what we're trying to do is remove as much slack from that system as possible by going to the tight cassette. So ideally, for my plan to prove out, there'll still be a little bit of noise now. And then we're going to remove that noise and that little bit of tugging on your feet when going to the HQ optimized performance system. A bit better, but not much actually. Once you're getting into it, it was so quiet at the start of the day, then it got considerably worse. And it's taken a small nibble, but there's still feedback in your feet and there is still a lot of noise. It feels like the rear mech's having to do so much work to keep tension in the system. Now it's time to go to the final setting, moving to the 9-45 tooth cassette. We also can remove some chain here because it's not needed, quietening the system further. I'm just going to flick the clutch to make sure it's as easy as possible to get out. That's done. Wow, it's like being in the Tour de France. With this cassette, because the largest cog is so much smaller, we can then run a lot less chain without that idler and leave it to that extra long derailleur to handle all that retention that's needed from having a bike with such a rearward axle path. That is my plan. Basically, because of the combination of the rearward axle path and that wide range cassette, to get something where the chain was under appropriate tension and being managed correctly could be done with a derailleur. But with that amount of chain, because of that 51 tooth, you'd need a derailleur cage that was so long. What we've done by going to a tighter spread is bring the amount of retention into the window of the long cage mech. So where have I got to with this? Well, I've solved one problem. I really think I have. I think going to the shorter and shorter chain was taking similar sized chunks out of the noise and little bits of feedback coming through your feet, until this setup I don't think is quite as all out good as the double idler, but I think it's pretty close. However, it set me up for another problem. Now I've got a chainring that will make mincemeat of me and my legs. But that's where the high pivot is such a perfect home for this idea, I suppose, because it's the bike that isolates those pedaling forces away from the suspension. So you could run a smaller chainring. For the record, I'm a big advocate of smaller chainrings. I think the idea of running something that is kind of inoperable, unusable, uncomfortable is daft. In terms of gear inches, a 32-51 is very similar to a 30-45. But honestly, with a high pivot, I would be tempted to go even lower. I've been running Sidekick for a long time now, and in the summer I was running a 28 tooth, and for everything but bike park, it was comfortable, it was fast, it was conversational as you're cruising your way up climbs. And speaking of E13, they've been making more for kind of gravel, like a 9-45 cassette for a while. Now, full disclosure, they are a partner of the channel, but it does give a great option for someone that runs an XD freehub body. But Shimano going all in on this with a corresponding derailleur, I think is really, really good. And I'm going to say that whether you have a high pivot or some kind of drivetrain device to lessen the influence of the drivetrain on the suspension, either way, I think we should all be running tighter cassettes with less chain and smaller chain rings. If nothing else, there's less metal, it's lighter, and I think offers really, really good performance. Now, one thing this little experiment has done is drastically reduced, not the chain flail, but the likelihood that Trek are going to get this slash back anytime soon. I think it's made the best descending enduro bike I've ever ridden, maybe a bike that is also very good to live with. And hand on heart, I'm not sure I could have said that before. Now, if you want to see us optimize any bikes or do any weird, nerdy stuff like this again, please do get in the comments and let us know, or pick us up on Patreon, where you can talk tech to us directly. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.